Hi, my name's David, and I want to talk about language and how it pertains to culture, specifically the Spanish language and Latino culture. I don't believe being able to speak Spanish makes somebody more Latino, or not being able to speak Spanish makes somebody less Latino, but I do think it's very important as a medium, as a way to experience and preserve our culture, passing it on from one generation to the next. And what I mean by that is, for example, being able to speak Spanish helps me connect to my culture through when I visit Mexico, and I'm able to communicate and operate in that country more easily than if I didn't. And so I can have experiences and I can have interactions with people that really enable me to enrich myself and learn more about my culture that I didn't know previously. It also helps me communicate with other people in the United States, other Latinos in the United States, whether they're Mexican Americans or from another Spanish-speaking country. I can communicate with them and connect and learn more about their culture and even my own by communicating and interacting with them. Or even if I go to any other Spanish-speaking country, the same concept, interacting, communicating with people is very important in enriching myself and the interaction and growing in my knowledge and understanding. And lastly, as we have a more and more globalized society and globalized world, research shows that people who are able to speak multiple languages do better. They achieve higher academically. They have more opportunities in the workplace. So there's just so much that is wrapped into preserving language as a part of culture. Me specifically, that's Mexican culture, Mexican American culture, being a Latino, and Spanish. And there's people of all ages, Latinos of all ages that can't speak Spanish, and there's Latinos of all ages that can't speak Spanish. Now, I believe the root of a lot of that is the forced upon assimilation that our culture, the dominant culture, which is English-speaking white middle class culture, has tried to just move people towards, not only Latinos, but including Latinos. And growing up here in Arizona, southern Arizona, a place that for a very long time was Mexico. And my family for generations has lived in this region, this area. So at some point, the border was established somewhere else, and my family, who was always Mexican, stayed here and was now American. The government, again, does try and push towards this English-speaking only type of education. And for 100 years, people were punished and looked down upon and forced to speak English only, even though Spanish was their home language, their heart language. And although a lot of that was a long time ago, or the worst of it rather, was a long time ago, the effects are still being felt today. I talk to friends who can't speak Spanish, and what they tell me is their grandparents were punished and treated poorly for speaking Spanish. So they didn't want their kids to have to go through that, which is understandable. It's understandable for a family member to say, this person, my child, is more important to me than speaking Spanish. Which is it's a decision they shouldn't have to make, abandon their culture or be treated well. It's not a decision anybody should have to make, but I understand the decision. So now, 2, 3, 4 generations later, there's Latinos of all ages who don't know a single word in Spanish, or very little. And it all stems from decades ago, how people were treated. For the culture, I take it global. I've been moreno, papi loco. My own personal experience with the Spanish language is I grew up in a bilingual home. My grandmother only spoke Spanish, and my parents spoke both languages. All my tios can speak both languages, and My mother tells me that I didn't speak much until I was over 3 years old. And the reason was, what she tells me is she took me to the doctor to be, evaluated. Why aren't I speaking much? And the doctor said that I was trying to choose between speaking English or Spanish, so they had to pick one. So Spanish was my first language, although I did grow up speaking bilingually in the home. I even went through all of elementary school to a bilingual elementary school called Liberty Elementary. And there, I remember very specifically speaking both languages, being taught in both languages, and saying, for example, saying the Pledge of Allegiance in both English and Spanish every single morning, lining up before class. And that's great because the Pledge of Allegiance is something that's distinctly American, but I'm experiencing that in both English and Spanish. So there's a melding. I'm not having to choose between culture and society. There's a melding of the two, which is very beneficial. I had an opportunity to speak to my friend George, whose mother was born in Nogales, Sonora, and his father was born in Nogales, Arizona, about his experience speaking Spanish. George, thank you so much for helping me with my project. We've known each other for 23 years.
Absolutely.
Right? So we both grew up. Right now we're on the south side of Tucson, predominantly Latino side of town, right? So tell me, do you think as a Latino, is it important to learn and know Spanish?
I think it is. I think there's an importance to being able to speak the language. A little story: when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I remember my grandmother actually coming to the house, and I grew up kind of learning a little bit of both languages, but more so English. And my grandmother, when she came, she was speaking in Spanish, and I couldn't understand her and kind of really speak with her. And I remember at 9 years old, I was like, Mom, like I can't not understand my grandmother. Whenever I'm speaking Spanish, can you correct me? That way I can learn it even better. And that kind of threw me on a journey of just like getting the language even more so throughout my life. So I think it was very important actually to be able to learn the language.
Yeah, I mean, communicate with somebody you love, right? You didn't like that barrier being there.
Right.
So, do you think Latinos lose a part of their culture if they don't know Spanish?
You know, that's a really interesting question because what comes to my mind is I have a friend of mine who they've had the opportunity to travel like all around the world, and we were having a conversation, and I asked him, if you had a superpower, what would it be? And they were like, the ability to learn any language, not flying, not any kind of superpower, but language. And I was like, why? And they said, because when you know the language, there's a deeper part of the culture that you're able to experience that you don't have without that. And it was really interesting. So I feel like, life is lived in the language, and when we have that language, you're able just to understand the culture in a deeper way. So
that's great, yeah, because when you are translating or interpreting more accurately, right? Because a lot of times there's not direct translations for phrases and words. That's great. Thank you. As I drove through the neighborhood that I grew up in, I went just less than a half mile from the street I lived on and visited a school. I heard about this school and what this principal was doing to push back against this cultural slide. Jonathan Basurto is the director of the Push Ridge Christian Academy Southside campus. Jonathan and his teachers are determined to provide a quality and dual language education to any child who would like. So here I am with Principal Pastor Jonathan here, principal of Push Ridge Christian Academy Southside, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a very unique school. So tell us how unique this school is.
So Push Ridge Christian Academy in itself is a Christian classical school for Christian families.
That's right. And then it's even more unique because it's the only
one in the nation that does it in Spanish. The beautiful part too is anybody who's in education knows you can't just throw this in. So that means there has to be a lot of time in prayer and a lot of time in planning and a lot of time of commitment to the organization and also to the community to say, we're doing this together for the long term. Right. So this is not something you can do K-5 or K-8. This is something you have to do K-12. And there's pockets of schools here and there that try to do something similar with like, well, if you don't want to do that route, you can take the B route, which is all English, or you can take the C route, which is kind of a hybrid. No, this is it. This is the way we do education here. And so being a first in the nation of a school to make a commitment like that to the community, it's pretty huge.
And that really brings me to the heart of what I wanted to talk about, because, you know, this whole project I'm doing here is about the importance of the Spanish language to our culture as Latinos. And this community is a predominantly Latino area.
Right.
So why was it important for you to spearhead and create this school that is in Spanish?
Right. That's an amazing question. A lot of people don't even know how to say this, but the reason is embarrassment. If you're from a Spanish-speaking background and you live in the United States of America, you will constantly hear, "No tienes vergüenza." But you're not embarrassed? You can't even speak to your nana in Spanish? You can't speak to them in Spanish? And what's your problem? You live in America. You can't speak English? You should be embarrassed. So a child who starts from a very young age here in this world, you should be embarrassed. What does that do to the life of that child? The life of a person who comes from a Spanish-speaking culture or any other culture that speaks a different language and comes to America is always in survival mode. Our brains are wired for survival. They're not wired for holding on to our culture, right? The problem is we think as a nation that the way to make you become American or for the way for you to survive is that you have to give this up in order to learn this. But data has shown throughout schools over and over again, that's wrong.
I think you're doing great work to really empower people. And we're living in a more and more global society, right? Information and knowledge and exposure to ideas multiculturally is just more than it's ever been. And it'll, because of technology, continue to be more than it's ever been. So I think you're absolutely right when you're saying what kind of person, what kind of contributor to society is that going to be? I think they're going to be even greater contributors than somebody who maybe only speaks one language, no matter what that language is.
That's right. The beautiful part about it is, but what about the kid who doesn't come from that background? What about the kid who comes from, like, say, Saurita, who generations of family knows zero Spanish, right? So we have a kid like that. We have a lot of kids like that, but this one particular kid, he starts learning Spanish, picks it up, has the accent down. Mom and dad are like, who is this kid? How's that even possible? But now he's entered this phase, now I want to learn how to read. And he takes a book from classroom and he says, Mom, can you help me read this? Right? Mom's like, I don't know any Spanish, I'm not doing this. But I'll tell you what, let's go get a raspado down the street. Now think about that for a second. A woman who has zero clue about anything Hispanic, Mexican, but because of the time the mom has spent with the other moms and building relationships, she knows to take her son to get raspado down the street at Oasis, right? Mom takes the son, they go inside. She doesn't know. Son ends up ordering because she can't read the menu, nor does she even know. She knows what fruit she likes, but son knows the fruits. Yeah. So he's ordering for mom. This is a 5-year-old who has zero Spanish background from just what he's learned at school and is already ordering for mom at the Oasis, right? They sit down, they got their food. More people are coming in and ordering. Mom's trying to read a book with son, doing horrible, right? But there's all these people inside the restaurant who are watching this happen. And then you get a person who's willing to step out and they say, hey, mijo, you want me to teach you how to read this? Sí, por favor, sí, ayúdame. And so person and his family come alongside student and mom, right? And they're reading a Christian book together in this little restaurant, right? The community is teaching this boy. That's the difference when you teach like this, is now there's a level of empathy that comes in and astonishment and inspirando that happens that would have never happened. That we try to force people too much in the school setting, but because there's a love of learning that's developed, now parents want to be a part of that, and now the community wants to embrace that, and let me show you how we can do this together. Right? That business owner who told me the story, it was the business owner who told me the story, not the parent or someone who was helping out. The business owner was so floored because he's wearing this Bushwick shirt, right? She drives down the street, comes in here, and she says, I want to know how you do this here because this is what happened at my restaurant, and I want to know more, and this is awesome, right? It's beautiful to watch it come together.
So I am interested to know, has there been any kind of resistance? You don't have to like name names or people or anything. You can keep it broad if you want, but has there been any resistance to what you're trying to do here at all?
In all the churches that we've talked to, we have a relationship with 72 different churches right now because none of the churches we spoke to said no. They never said no, sorry. All the businesses that we've talked to, not one has said no. All of the people that work within the neighborhood, we range from drug addicts who live in the tunnels to people who are coming to and fro. Nobody has said no. It's been even amazing to watch, even guys who are in addiction who are very respectful of the school, and even the taggers. They have free game out here, and they've been extremely respectful of the school. And I don't know if that's because it bears the name of Christ. I would like to think it does. But everybody has been very respectful.
And about when I was 10, 11 years old, I moved to a different part of town with my father and to a more predominantly white English-speaking part of town. And I lost a lot of Spanish. I had more difficulty speaking with my grandmother, and she would make fun of me for it and things of that sort. So it was kind of shameful that I didn't know Spanish as well. And it wasn't until much older, a little bit after high school, having lost a lot of my Spanish, still being able to speak it brokenly and get by, but not very well. I knew enough to interview and get a job where I spoke Spanish entirely in that job. And so during my time in that job, I had that job for a couple years, I picked up a lot more Spanish because I was speaking it every day, nearly all the day. And so I'm very grateful. The job wasn't great, but I'm very grateful for that experience because it really helped me regain a lot of my ability to speak Spanish, a lot of my culture. And since then, it's gone up and down, up and down. There's times where I don't get the opportunity to use it much because of where I am and the people I interact with. It's not very easy. And also, by the look of me, a lot of people can't tell that I'm a Latino. I'm very light-skinned. My brother and I were called the Güeros growing up, which means light-skinned, light features. So that's something that's always been a part of my life, but a lot of people don't realize, and then I'll say something, I'll speak Spanish, or even if I don't speak a whole sentence in Spanish, I'll be saying a sentence in English, and I'll say a Spanish word correctly, or the name of a country correctly, like tortilla, or just something like that. And sometimes I'll be made fun of for it because like, whoa, where did that come from? And when I speak Spanish completely, people are very surprised. One time I had a coworker, they were speaking in Spanish during a training, and I spoke to them back in Spanish, and they said, whoa, hey, thanks for letting me know that you speak Spanish before I talk trash about you. So that was just a funny incident that happened. The stories told here are just a few, and there are many that are different and many that are similar. Either way, even if it's not our fault that we did or didn't learn Spanish, I believe it is our responsibility to learn it and pass it on in order to preserve this part of our culture.
How you love a country food more than its people? Cause I think you hide behind your politics. Yeah. You do not want answers, you want arguments. Okay, yes, I love the kingdom more than I love my nation. Yeah, yes, I love my neighbor more than I love his papers. Okay, still alive.